Today, my guest is Pierre Paslier, is co-founder and co-CEO of Notpla. Pierre is London-based, and you're an innovation design engineer, and you spent your career exploring the intersection of design and technology. You've started your career as a packaging engineer for L'Oreal, very fancy, where you worked during the day and experimented with 3D printing in your free time. And this is that passion that led you to study at the Royal College of Art, where you co-designed one of the first consumer Delta 3D printers. After completing your studies, you co-founded not just one, but two startups, Gravity Sketch, which creates 3D designs in virtual reality, and Notpla, the topic of today, focusing on developing sustainable packaging. And you're currently the co-CEO of Notpla, dedicated to finding solutions to the global plastic crisis through your work on packaging made from seaweed. And Notpla won the Price Williams Earthshot Prize in 2022. We'll talk about that. I have some cool photos. And you have a master's degree from RSCA's Innovation Design Engineering program and INSA from Lyon. I thought that would be helpful for our audience who may not be familiar to have a few visuals, and maybe you can do a bit of voiceover on what we're seeing over a few slides, and then we'll wrap the slides and get straight to conversation. So Pierre, tell me, what are we seeing here?
So this is a few products that we have developed over the past few years that are typically requiring some plastic, typically like single-use plastics, where we think that we can replace them with something that is a lot more virtuous, seaweed. On the left and at the bottom, this is the product that we are actually kind of like producing at the largest scale to date, food takeaway containers. Typically when you're having food on the go, it's never just cardboard. There's a thin layer of plastic in there or some PFAS to kind of like make those fiber materials resist the grease and moisture from the food. And so we have developed a coating made from seaweed that we apply onto that cardboard that actually provides that barrier and makes the whole packaging natural, biodegradable, and that makes a lot of sense in cases where those might end up in nature, you consume on the go. Those are kind of like quite easy to lose type of packaging. So we've been excited about rolling this out for a while. And on the top right, it's actually kind of like, in this case, a material that is this time fully made from seaweed. It's a flexible film. I actually have some like a roll here. So you can see this is kind of like essentially a roll of flexible seaweed film that can be used for making little sachets and bags and all sorts of different little like containers that unfortunately have very low residual value when they're made of plastic, and therefore no one really has any incentive to pick them up out of nature. So we think that those cases are good use also of like seaweeds. And the particular kind of like use case that you see here is like a pack of instant noodles. One thing quite cool that we can do about like seaweed is like leveraging the fact that it's literally edible, and in some cases it's soluble. So this whole pack can be thrown into kind of like the boiling water on your kind of like pot, and it will dissolve, and you can literally have kind of like your pack disappear in front of your eyes, no waste. So that's something that we think is quite a different experience, a little bit more magical. Because we don't have to copy plastic like for like. We can actually create some new things that you couldn't dream of doing with plastic. So that's a bit the approach at Notpla.
Is that the sauce inside the packaging? You can even have
It's
this.
also like a little kind of like dose of like spices and things like this. So like pushing the solubility concept to the maximum.
Wow, love it. It's so cool. And then the bottom one, I see a logo from Just Eat. Can you say maybe a few words about it?
So when we started developing this, we realized that there were a few places where it made a lot of sense to use more natural packaging. And one of them was food service, either kind of like in places where you're going to buy from a street vendor or kind of like from a restaurant, but also like when you get things delivered at home. And so in Europe, the largest like delivery platform is Just Eat. They used to own Grubhub in the US, but now we are also kind of like launched with like Uber Eats. Essentially, what we want is to make sure that those restaurants have a way of delivering the food without needing that little bit of plastic that make the whole thing quite problematic, we'll talk about like why plastic is a problem when it's kind of like lost in nature. But that's been a great partnership. It's brought us to kind of like 10 countries in Europe where we are active with Just It. And to date, we have replaced about 18 million single-use plastics with this technology.
Wow, incredible. Very impressive. I have to say, as a marketer, I really love also your lifestyle photography. Very cool.
Thanks. All done in-house. So actually, like the way we got started was quite experimental and not necessarily kind of like thinking of just replacing plastic like for like, but pushing the concept a bit further. We wanted with my co-founder to create something that feels more like a fruit than an industrial container made from synthetic materials. And so our first little experimentation in our kitchen was to try to create packaging that you can eat, packaging that feels like the skin of a fruit. And this was the result. We call it Oho. It's essentially the sound of surprise that our flatmates did when they saw the first prototype. They're like, "Oh!" So that's the natural like name in any kind of like part of the world. There's different pronunciations are like "ooh," "ah," but it's essentially like that. The natural like sound that comes out of people's mouth when they see that you have, in this case, for example, a little dose of energy gel or a cocktail or water that is packaged in a little kind of like bubble that is made from seaweed. And we found a particular kind of like good application for marathons, where if you've been to kind of like a race, there's just kind of like piles and piles of cups and bottles that are used just in a day. And so that product today, we focus mostly on providing kind of like this for marathons, for kind of like hydration stations. And especially for energy gel, it's quite a interesting use case that people can have just one gesture. It's again like a bit the magic of having edible packaging. You can deal with this a bit like a cherry tomato rather than a sachet that you have to kind of like open with both hands and squish, and then it's kind of like full of sticky residue afterwards. So playing with the fruit analogy once again.
Very good.
So that's my co-founder Rodrigo. We'll probably talk a bit about like our background stories, but he actually kind of like trained as an architect. I didn't train in any way as like working with seaweed. So both of us have been, I guess, just curious to use things that are naturally present in the environment. And seaweed feels like the most plasticky thing that nature has come up with. So it was a pretty good starting point for kind of like thinking that we could replace some plastic with seaweed. And so that's yeah, like taken in our lab where we have a team of about 60 people at the moment, all based in London, and we developed the fundamental technology that we then can hopefully apply at scale on existing plastic factories. So our goal is not so much to build new factories from scratch, but it's more to kind of like provide a better input material for those plastic factories to transform not plastic but seaweed into those packaging solutions. And on the right, it's like same like a soluble film applied for kind of like cosmetics and beauty applications. And that's Prince William doing a little bit of chemistry in our lab. So as you said, like one of the really exciting thing that I guess happened to us was winning the Earthshot Prize. The Earthshot Prize is this like very highly kind of like regarded sustainability prize and award that showcase every year kind of like 5 solutions in 5 different categories that are really trying to kind of like change the way we are consuming and how we can like restore nature. Our category was build a waste-free world, which I guess kind of like makes a lot of sense by making sure we use something that is abundant and we don't create kind of like something that nature cannot deal with. And I think it's helped a lot that we are based in London. He's based in London, so he's actually kind of like been visiting us and the labs like a year and a half ago. But we have had like quite a few interactions. I think I've probably kind of like seen him 8 times in the last couple of years. So he's a big fan of seaweed. Gets personally very kind of like invested in trying to change the status quo and connecting the right partners to pay attention and enable those new technologies. And the price comes with £1 million, so that's definitely quite helpful from a financial perspective.
That's absolutely awesome. Well, ho ho, maybe at the Buckingham Palace. That would be really
Yeah,
fun. I'm sure they have their own dishes and plates, but
Exactly.
I want to go back to your founder's journey. I think we alluded to the fact you have engineering and design. It's not the most common combination. So how did that really help you think creatively about the problem, and how did that lead you to Notpla?
Yeah. I don't think there was like a big master plan. I'm someone who's happy to kind of like explore without necessarily that like this is going to be the right path to go for like to the right place. So I think that um, I was a little bit torn between like engineering and science and design. And in France, the way those are taught are quite separate. Whereas I think that in lots of places, and like especially the masters that I ended up doing in London, there was really this approach that those are kind of like very interesting to bring together. Following good advice, I actually trained first as an engineer and ended up working as a plastics packaging engineer for L'Oreal for a couple of years, where I was making shampoo bottles and cream jars by the tens of millions. So obviously, kind of like that wasn't really ticking my purpose boxes, but it was really good learning of just kind of like the scale of the industry and understanding big corporations and so it became clear to me that was not something that I was kind of like really fulfilling all my kind of like desires. So I quit my job and I came to study a master's at Imperial College and Royal College of Art in London. And that was really a bit where the magic was happening. Like you had one foot in this technology university and one foot in this design and art kind of like universities and getting full access to the labs of kind of like those scientists and professors. You had like basically like a license to go and like talk to them as like a student of the university. So really remove some of the barriers, but also kind of like I think taking a look at things with a different angle than a pure kind of like science-based, technology-based approach. And that was the perfect mix for me to yeah, like I guess explore lots of different things. And one of these experimentations that was never really meant to turn into a startup was, hey, like, could we make something that feels like a fruit? Can we make a little prototype of something that you could find on a tree or kind of like pick up in a field? Um, and it didn't have to kind of like be solving everything. It was just like, can we make something like that? And that's really how this curiosity kind of like little experiment led us to play around with quite a lot of materials in our kitchen. My co-founder, Rodrigo, he was actually kind of like getting his hands on all sorts of different extracts of roots and starches and leaves and all sorts of things that are kind of like coming from nature. A lot of it was available as food ingredients. And because we were actually working out of our own kitchen and we had to still prepare the next meal and not poison ourselves, we had to be very restrictive about like what comes in the mix. So everything had to be edible. Otherwise, that was just kind of like not worth the risk. And that was a beautiful safeguarding kind of like principle that we keep to this day in our labs. We're not set up to handle toxic chemicals. So it means that we can't take the risk of adding 1% and then 2% and 5%. And all of a sudden you're kind of like mixing plastics and seaweed together and other kind of like materials. So we kept this kind of like strict approach. And I think that like the so the magic came or like the eureka moment was based on discovering or I guess kind of like realizing that if you ever had fake caviar, those little kind of like fake fish eggs, those are actually kind of like a very old technology created by Unilever in the 1940s for making a very cheap kind of like food product that looks like caviar. And to our surprise, this was made of seaweed extracts. And when we saw this like cool little technology that's called spherification that was relatively easy to make in your own kitchen, that you could encapsulate a little bit of like flavored water, like fish flavored for like the fake caviar or kind of like juice or whatever else that you could think of. That was like, wow, like you can actually make something that feels very fruity. And we didn't think too much about seaweed, but we started to research seaweed, and that's when we just kind of like became so impressed by the potential of seaweed. So some species of seaweed can grow incredibly fast, like up to a meter per day. So it's one of the fastest growing organisms on the planet. So definitely like very renewable. When it grows, it doesn't require fresh water or fertilizers or GMOs or pesticides. So quite amazing from kind of like a zero input agriculture compared to the very like intensive agriculture that is required for growing a lot of plants. And it sequesters carbon, it boosts the biodiversity of the oceans, and there's lots of different species of seaweed. So some of them are incredibly different. There's more genetic difference between a red seaweed and a brown seaweed than between a mushroom and an elephant. So we call it seaweed, but they are completely different organisms because they've had like essentially a billion years under the water to kind of like evolve in all sorts of different ways before life reached land. So very, very kind of like good mix of seaweed. Actually, behind me, that's a wall of like a short list of all the seaweed that we source from all around the world, and some of them are incredibly different from each other. So it felt like an amazing toolbox of like natural materials, natural polymers that we could blend together and hopefully create something that had good packaging properties. But the best thing is because seaweed has been around for over a billion years, in a way, wherever it ends up, it never creates forever waste. It's super easy for pretty much any bacteria, any microbe, any kind of like life form to turn it back into the building blocks for the next form of life, which is not the case with plastic or bioplastics. So that was like, okay, if we use something that is already abundant in nature, we know that nature is going to be kind of like fully compatible with that. And that was a quite kind of like exciting prospect of making packaging that might be lost in nature because the system is leaky and imperfect and we'll continue to lose some of our packaging in the ocean and in nature, but knowing that it will never create forever waste.
What I understand is also you got a lot of viral interest for the product because obviously we always try to understand the match between a consumer demand or enterprise demand and feasibility of innovation. Can you tell us what happened and how that Ho product went viral?
So again, like this is a 1 month project as part of like uni. It's not meant to be anything more than like a portfolio kind of like cool project, and then you move on to the next. And at the end of the project, we've made those kind of like little bubbles filled with water. We actually decided to license this as Creative Commons, so make a little video that explains a bit as a tutorial how to make this at home. And I think like embracing a bit this kind of like open innovation model, it made it super easy for other people to replicate this at home and then kind of like do it, I don't know, like with the kids on a Sunday or build on that version that we kind of like shared and make their own their own take on it. So that video started to get attention, but other videos that were kind of like actually kind of like saying, "Hey, we've tried this edible kind of like water bottle, and like you'll be surprised by the results," and all of these kind of like very kind of like viral hooks and so on. That did the job for us. So a lot of those videos went on to get like millions of views and some big kind of like YouTubers, and it went on TV, and it was like on the morning shows in like Japan. People were kind of like they had like a gold medalist who was kind of like trying to replicate it on stage and so on. So there was all this kind of like constellation of viral videos of like there is this new weird cool thing, edible packaging. And from there, like we first of all we were very surprised because like it was far from being refined. It was like tasting very salty and seaweedy, and it was a very like not even like a viable prototype. It was the beginning of a solution. But it showed that actually this was capturing people's imagination, which was really interesting. And then people started to write articles saying like, could this be kind of like the kind of solution to the plastics problem, how scalable it is. And so I think that's what gave us the motivation of being like, we can't leave it as a half-developed solution. Let's try to give it a go and like make this a real kind of like in scalable industrial kind of like solution that has impact. So when we graduated, we decided to kind of like raise a bit of like we wrote a few grant applications and gave it a go, and like that's how we started as a company.
So you mentioned, I think you did crowdsourcing, applied for grants, and then congratulations, by the way, you just raised 25 million for your Series A. What's been your approach to fundraising, and how do you choose the partner for fundraising?
There might be a theory, but like for us, it's always been very ad hoc. Reacting to what the conditions were. So at the beginning, and like not having a business background, we found it really hard to essentially kind of like get any business angels or kind of like anyone that would write the small first checks to believe that we had a business here. It was a bit of a curiosity. People would take the calls, but they wouldn't kind of like write the checks. So after a year and a half of failing to raise from anyone, we decided to go for equity crowdfunding. It was a bit like a all-in, like last resort. If it didn't work out, we would just kind of like stop the project. I think it was also like an exciting new funding mechanism that I think has matured, maybe lost a little bit its kind of like edge in some cases, but I think it was the right time as well for us to kind of like go and use this. And then we put this online, and within 3 days we raised $1 million. 900 people from around the world are kind of like chipping in, and at the back of this, like some of the viral videos get like there's one video that was in the top 10 of like Facebook videos that year. I think it got 91 million views or something like this. So completely insane, kind of like we were still doing the same thing, but I think we had found our audience. And so, yeah, the internet backed us and decided that this was something that was worth building or giving a shot to build in this world. And so we took that, and that was the beginning of the journey. And after that, it became a lot easier to kind of like raise money because we had a bit of a track record. We showed what we did with that first million, and institutional started to become like a bit more at ease. So we did like a seed round and then kind of like a Series A. And yeah, I mean, like there's times where we go to market and like the market is super hot and super easy to raise, and there's other times where everyone has kind of like disappeared and everyone is kind of like sitting on a ton of dry powder, not wanting to kind of like take a risk. So I think we're a bit in that case at the moment. It was like quite a long fundraising journey for us to get this $25 million. But once we had a bit the kind of like the critical mass, it actually accelerated and was really kind of like successful because I think people realize that this shift is inevitable. Like we need to transition to sustainable packaging, yes or yes. Uh, who is going to kind of like win and what's going to be the winning solution? That's debatable, but the market cannot kind of like continue to pollute with forever chemicals and forever materials for much longer before we bridge some of those kind of like planetary limits. So I think that's something that like resonates with a lot of investors, some impact investors, some kind of like billionaires and kind of like family offices that are also in it for kind of like wanting to see some better solutions on the market.
Any investment from the US, from the people we know in the big VCs, or you're mainly European at that point?
None from the big American VCs, but like a few people who've backed us. The Schmidt Family Foundation like came in on the last round, but also Lupa Systems, Torch Capital are kind of like two that like backed us earlier on. So definitely like in the US, there's lots of people looking at this, keen to see how kind of like that could that could be the hopefully the next big thing that is not just about like making an economical return, but also kind of like feeling proud of what you've put on the market. I think the like there is this crazy thing about like looking for innovative products and technologies that are going to disrupt their market, that are going to be radically different. And yet the way to fund them and the way to run and lead those organizations has to be super kind of like stuck in the past. And I think that that's a bit kind of like what we've kind of like felt is like forcing to have like one CEO and then taking a very kind of like hierarchical approach for kind of like just focusing on creating the only thing that you're allowed to innovate with is the product or the technology that feels very counterintuitive. So we've had the chance of taking that kind of like leap of faith with this crowdfunding campaign. So we had like £1 million and pretty much no kind of like lead investors or no one who was representing a significant chunk of that money. So for the first kind of like couple of years, it was it was like without much kind of like oversight from someone who might at this stage impose the canonical approach of like you need to structure into this, into that. And that gave us the chance of showing that that model works well for Notpla and for us. And after that, it wasn't really challenged because that's the thing that has been kind of like delivering value. The amazing thing is that it provides the chance of bouncing ideas with a peer without feeling that like there's one person who's kind of like making the call at the end. You need to be able to kind of like agree easily on things. And luckily with Rodrigo, we have this amazing ability to very quickly reach consensus. So in those past 10 years, we've never kind of like been stuck on anything for any significant amount of time. It's more like the chance of taking it out of one brain, because as long as it's in your brain, you can have multiple versions existing at once. It's all messed up. But if you need to explain it to someone else, you need to pick and confront yourself to reality. And then what you get back is really valuable. And so being able to kind of like do that is something that I think works really well for us.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think we discussed a lot about finding your co-founder in this podcast because it's not an easy task. And I love the fact you didn't have a real boss at the beginning with crowdfunding. It's pretty unusual for a startup. And you said really you have what, about 60 people?
Yeah.
How are you growing? And I had this question about now, every meeting you go to in the US, it's all about you hire very few people and you use a lot of AI. And I was curious if that was applicable to you because of your business, or is also the fact that you're in the UK slightly different approach or priorities. How are you growing the team?
Yeah. Um, I think like we don't want to necessarily kind of like hire for the sake of hiring, not because of AI, but like because I think we want to create like a sound business and we want to make sure that we are creating the right value and growing at the right pace. I think like, I mean, the AI like opportunities are big, but the AI bubble is massive as well. And like at the end of the day, we live in a real world where we eat real food, we consume real physical products that are made one by one. And I think there's a limit to the digital world. And unfortunately, I think like the stats is like 80% of like VC money goes into digital and 20% in the physical world. But like at the end of the day, we live in a physical world. So in a physical world, there's lots of complexity. I think we see limited impact of AI per se on kind of like solving this for now. That being said, we are kind of like making ourselves, I guess, AI ready for the future. So like really high amount of kind of like data collected to be able to kind of like eventually get the right insights. But we've tried not everything that's on the market of kind of like AI for materials and for kind of like manufacturing, and nothing has been better than our material PhDs and kind of like scientists and engineers. So I'm sticking with like humans with a little bit of help for AI for productivity, but at the end of the day, like I think that this is where I think the winning combination is like help your people to be a bit more productive, but trust that your people are quite good at what they do.
Found that very reassuring. I think last podcast we discussed a little bit of AlphaFold and using some of the AI model for protein engineering and moving faster. But the same was like you need a fabulous scientist to be at the helm. Just like we all need to have experts driving AI. So really good to hear. Since you're talking about the physical world, I'm curious from a manufacturing perspective, what are the challenges of working with seaweed? And obviously, I think a lot of company in the world of bio, the scale is always a difficult step. How are you addressing it?
Yeah, many challenges keeps us busy. I think so. At first, we developed our own machines for making those like bubbles, and quickly, like I mean, well, not quickly, like we spent a lot of money and a lot of years in kind of like developing new kind of like manufacturing technology, and realized that you could make things very differently, but like the time to scale up is very long and it's very costly. So we reviewed a bit our position and we're like, okay, it's got to work on the existing infrastructure, otherwise it's going to take like an extra 20 years for it to kind of like work at scale. And so started working with essentially like existing factories and existing machine manufacturers, and it's tricky because like those machines, they were built for plastic, and plastic is an extremely precise kind of like material. You're able to control every single kind of like piece of the material in your like chemical reactor, and you get kind of like a perfect distribution of kind of like length, and everything is very kind of like synthetic. So those machines, they rely on that kind of like on that to function well. So to make it work with something that is grown in nature, that has like slightly different properties on a season and the next, that has kind of like the ability to kind of like break down at the end of the day, but it means that it's not indestructible. It has all sorts of kind of like challenges. At the same time, like when you solve those, you've created a pretty good moat for yourself. So a lot of kind of like the like know-how and IP is in how we've made it work on plastics like machine. Um, and yeah, like it's all about scale. Unless you make things in like hundreds of millions of units in this industry, you'll never be able to compete on price. And so that's the big advantage of the incumbent. And so right now, a lot of what we do is try to kind of like break this chicken and egg of kind of like scale and kind of like bring the cost down. But literally like last year, we kind of like started working with contract catering companies. One of them, like Levy, they've transitioned all of their stadiums to use Notpla in Europe. It's like Wimbledon and the Oval and Twickenham and Chelsea, Tottenham Hotspurs, all of the kind of like entertainment venues like the O2 and so on. And together you bring those kind of like volumes and you produce bigger kind of like runs, and mathematically you get much better price. So that allowed us to reduce the cost by 30% year on year. At the same time, like some of our competitors, like the stable biomaterials that are on the market that are still plastic, they've gone up by 10% because of kind of like pressure of kind of like the kind of like cost of energy and so on and so forth. So I think the trend is going in our direction, but you still need to kind of like convince people to switch now, not kind of like in 3 years. So that's where it's all about internal champions, people who are like, I like this. I would like to be the one who makes it work for my organization, and I'm going to navigate these guys around my organization, explain how a decision is made, and so there's a handful of of people who've made big kind of like projects happen because they thought that that was the worthwhile thing to do, and that's been really valuable.
I feel like we're always thinking about these adoption curves, right? Your early adopters and champions willing to take more risks can champion you in the industry. How does it work on the seaweed side? Do you need to strike partnerships with seaweed providers to have a constant and certain level of quality for the seaweeds, or is it pretty open?
Yeah, so I mean, like the crazy thing about seaweed is we don't realize, but it's also like already present in our day-to-day life. So it's in your toothpaste, it's in your kind of like cosmetic products, it's in ketchup, it's in beer, it's in pet food, in fertilizers, in all sorts of different applications where they use a little bit of like an extract to do a little bit of a functionality. So you don't hear about it, but it's there. And that together means that the world produces between 30 and 40 million tons of seaweed every year. So we can tap directly into this existing supply chain for seaweed, which is amazing. It means we don't need to have our own boats and our own kind of like seaweed farms. We can work with people who already work within those other applications. But obviously, none of them are making packaging grade seaweed extracts. So we need to work with them to tweak it so that if they were making farmer grade seaweeds, it's great. It's got amazing kind of like health properties, but maybe you don't really care about that for your packaging. But what you care about is that it doesn't cost a fortune. So we bypass a few of the steps and we kind of like make sure that they are kind of like using maybe the part that they don't use for pharma. That would be a waste, and that can be used for packaging. And there's all sorts of like things we can do like that to essentially create the right products in partnership, and to have kind of like all of this turning into the right offering that has the right properties at the right price point for our clients.
Amazing. Yeah, you mentioned to me that the foam on the beer is actually enabled by seaweed. Now I look at beers very differently and I brag around to people like, you know what's happening? Very good icebreaker. You talk a lot about partnerships, and I understand that's how you started with Just Eat and also working on big campuses, hopefully, and being present hopefully in some of the US campuses we're all familiar with. Yeah, let us know if we can help. But I wanted to learn more. I think you have also the lab. Can you tell us how you partner with some of the brands and what's the process, the commercial process?
Yeah, so I mean, like plastics is a massive problem for so many brand owners that essentially like all of their products are kind of like accessible to their clients through the use of plastic. And a little bit of about plastic, but like the problem with plastic is it's really disrupting like some of the most kind of like hidden but important kind of like systems on the planet. So on one end, plastic, when it ends up in nature, it is indestructible as a material because it's only existed for about like 150 years. Actually, like fun fact, plastic was invented about 300 meters from where we are based in East London. There's a plaque on the wall that says first plastic in the world, Alexander Parks. And actually, like funny story, I'll just show you. We have a sample of one of the first plastics in the world in the office.
Wow.
It's in perfect condition. So it shows that like plastic doesn't go away. Like 150 years on, it's perfect. So like the problem is it fragments into smaller and smaller chunks, and those chunks become microplastics and then nanoplastics, and that has very deep like complications for health for both human and like marine and kind of like any kind of like life on Earth health because it gets in places where it shouldn't be. A couple of weeks ago, there was an article on like there's about like half a gram of plastic in our brain on average, and it's the trend is kind of like getting worse and worse. Like you really don't want to have those particles in those places because they create micro state of inflammation, and inflammation over kind of like the course of a day is not so bad, but over the course of a lifetime, it creates a lot of kind of like problems for fertility as well. And then the other problem is that it's messing with the natural ways that our environment sequesters a lot of carbon. So plastic is actually a very big climate change problem. The main kind of like reason to be kind of like worried about plastics in the ocean is plankton. It sequesters about 30% of humanity's carbon. And the more plankton is eating microplastics, the more it's stopping that process of carbon capture. So those are the reasons why those brands, back to the brands, I guess they all know that like they really need to kind of like find an alternative. And it's not easy because they've created products that are incredibly fragile, that are enabled by the incredible properties of plastic because we've been quite lazy in product development and making things very, very kind of like precise and fragile and being able to do that because plastic is amazing. And so when they reach out to us because they think that like our technology could apply to their needs, usually like it's not a straight here is the reference that you can buy and it will work in your factory. A lot of the time we need to kind of like make it a bit of like a customization effort because we are still exploring. And so after I think realizing over a few kind of like iterations that we have very different sizes and very different kind of like timelines and very different cultures. We needed a little bit of a process, and that's what Futures Lab is all about at Notpla. So this is our way of kind of like creating the right space, inviting the right teams to kind of like co-create a bit what are the things we want to find out together, filter them, make sure that it's relevant to them, but it's kind of like suitable for us as well, and then create kind of like quite actionable things that we can take on. Some of them are very like discovery phase, so it might be quite early on. We don't really know the answer. Some of them might be incredibly kind of like practical. Okay, like we'll visit your factory with a ton of our material and we'll make it work maybe by the end of the day. But the lab is the way of kind of like doing this engagement process without falling into a supplier onboarding slash procurement conversation, which no one wants to have and kills all of the ability to work together.
It's such a smart approach. I see a lot of biotech companies stuck in pilot processes, and it feels like it, and the co-creation everybody gets skin in the game in this one. So very smart. Is there an average length for these partnerships, or it completely
I mean,
depends?
some of them have been now running for several years, but we try to make the first approach is like if we can get something in 4 to 6 weeks, um, prototyping, getting things in people's hands, it's like low cost, low risk, low kind of like strings attached. We're not here to kind of like start defining some mega exclusivity contract over kind of like geographies and so on. It's like, can we make one thing that like convinces that it's worth working together and then build it as you go. So we try to be low friction.
Very cool. Let's talk about fun stuff too. Everything is fun, but I shared with this group the video of Anna Waddington and the BBC reports, and it's just delightful and really funny. I think you had also you were on the FT recently. I saw that on your Instagram. Feels like you're everywhere. So I have to ask as a marketer, like, what's your approach to marketing and PR and getting excitement with the media? It looks like there's a lot of natural virality of what you're doing. And when we're planning this episode, I had so many people jumping and thinking, like, this is so cool. So cool is definitely part of the DNA, but we'd love to understand how also you as a founder spend your time on the PR aspect and what you find the most helpful to grow the company.
I think that there's not like a magic recipe. I think it's just that the story itself is quite easy for people to kind of like relate. So you talk about natural virality. I think it's just that like what we like the thing we do is naturally quite interesting, which is very lucky because there's a lot of climate change problems that are not so interesting but very important. But for us, it's always been relatively easy to kind of like get people to look at packaging in a different way, be surprised. And so I mean, like people spend millions with agencies and doing all these campaigns and everything. We've never really spent kind of like a dollar externally. We all do things in-house. We chip in quite a lot, so it's not just kind of like the one team, but it's actually kind of like a lot of co-creation of ideas internally. We experiment. There's a lot of stuff that we do that don't go viral at all, but like we're also always kind of like trying something different. And we're good at seizing opportunities, and we try to make the story quite personal as well. And I think that those are like good ingredients for it to resonate. I think the world is looking for some of those good news stories, and so when you create something that is kind of like showing good promise, there's a lot of people who are keen to kind of like talk about that. So we don't really have to force kind of like the agenda too much. It's just part of what people want to like, part of the content that people want to have in their hands.
Yeah, Pierre, how can this community help you? Introduction or talents? I don't know if you're hiring at the moment or developing partnership in the US. Anything we can do to help you?
Yeah, we're just entering the US. We have kind of like a couple of NBA stadiums that are starting to use Notpla. We are kind of like gonna hopefully put more effort in growing, but first I think we want to find a bit the early adopters, the low-hanging fruits. So one of the places where we are quite kind of like active is in like corporate campuses and university campuses for cafes and canteens and so on. And it's infinitely easier to kind of like have those conversations where it's someone from those organizations that has reached out to their catering manager. If you can find out like who is the catering company that is kind of like running those and say, oh, I really would love to see plastic-free solutions. And if they say, oh, but it's already plastic-free, like then you can do a bit of digging, but usually like
Mhm.
99% chance that it's not plastic-free or it's PFAS or it's not great because there's not so many options on the market. And that's the perfect kind of like way to like prep them to essentially kind of like want to talk with us and change a little bit whatever they're offering. Like change is always a bit of a process. So like we know that things are not going to happen overnight, but do speak to your favorite kind of like local restaurants or your corporate canteen or a festival local to you or whoever and say, oh, it would be great if you were eliminated single-use plastics. That would make me feel less guilty of kind of like attending and doing these things. And that's really good prep work for them to kind of like us to introduce our solutions.
Happy to do that. Thank you so much. It was so much fun. We're all super excited about what you're doing. And yeah, we hope to see some of your samples here in San Francisco very soon.
Well, thank you so much, everyone.
Take care.
Thank
Have a
you.
great week. Thank you, Pierre. Bye.